Jesus is like a shepherd pursuing one sheep. He's like a woman pursuing one coin. He's like a father going out after a lost son. The reason he eats with tax collectors is because he's after them, the lost, to find them, to make joy happen in heaven over one tax collector who repents.
I find it interesting that Jesus spent time with people that everyone else avoided. And maybe, like me, you've wondered, why did he do that? I'm Dan Kruver. In this episode of Light and Truth, John Piper turns to Luke 19 to reveal to us the heart of Jesus as the one who intentionally seeks the lost. This message was originally delivered at Bethlehem Baptist Church on Sunday evening, January 13th, 1985.
Luke chapter 19. We'll read this paragraph together, the story about Zacchaeus. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. The he, of course, is Jesus. He was a chief tax collector and rich, and he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not, on account of the crowd, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, "He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Let's take this verse at a time now and see what it has to teach us. Verse 1. He entered Jericho and was passing through. Jericho is a town to the east, northeast of Jerusalem, and it's on a significant trade route, so that bringing things from the east into Palestine, you'd pass through there. It's a lucrative place for a person to do the kind of thing Zacchaeus was good at. Jesus was passing through. If you just read this all by itself, you wouldn't stop on that phrase at all. But if you've been reading Luke through, then you'll know that from 951 on, he had set his face like a flint to go to Jerusalem. And that this section in Luke from chapter 9 up through chapter 19 is the travel narrative, as it's called, and he's on his way. And it pops up again and again. He's on his way to Jerusalem. And the reason that's significant is because he said in chapter 13:33, no prophet can die outside Jerusalem. He knows why he's going to Jerusalem. And it sort of, for me, gives a flavor to everything he does on the way. He does it under the cloud of his imminent death, which to me makes me love him more. Because when you're on your way to die, you tend to think about yourself, right? How much it's going to hurt. Not Jesus. He's always looking for people in trees that he can help. It's just amazing. So I wanted to underline that and point that out, that being on the way, he's just passing through here, and this incident takes on a remarkable flavor when you see it against that background. And then verse 2. There was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and rich. Zacchaeus, ironically, means pure one or righteous one. Zacchaeus, there was a rabbi named Rabbi ben Zacchaeus. He was very proud that that was his name. They must have just considered a great offense that this fellow had been given this name to be known as Zacchaeus. A chief tax collector was a naughty thing to be for a Jew. You can see that in this text. What down here is a clue that he's a stinker? It's not just because he's rich. What? Verse 7. And when they saw it, they all murmured, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Okay, now that's other people's opinion. What about his own opinion? All right, this word right here is crucial for his own assessment of himself. And if I've defrauded, if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. He knows he has gotten rich by fraud. And we all know that. That's what tax collectors are known for. If you look back at the beginning of the book of Luke to chapter 3, verse 13, tax collectors came out to John the Baptist, remember? And they said to him, what should we do? Remember what he said? He did not say, stop being a tax collector, by the way. He said in verse 13, and he said to them, collect no more than is appointed for you. The great reputation of the tax collectors is that they took too much, and they had that authority from the Roman government. That's why the scoundrels took the job. These were Jews who were complicitous with the Roman government. The Roman government said, we'll give you the right to collect taxes, and you can pad your pockets as much as you can get away with. And so that was their reputation. They were hated by the Jews, the other Jews, and he didn't seem to be any different than the ordinary cut. Matthew 5:46, you remember when Jesus was talking about love, and he said, if you only love those who love you, what do you more than the tax collectors? So even Jesus knew they were a bad lot. And chapter 18, verse 17 of Matthew, when it says, if you go to your brother 1, 2, 3 times and he still won't repent, treat him like a Gentile and a tax collector. That is, an outsider who won't have anything to do with righteousness. So, enough to show that a tax collector, especially a chief tax collector, I assume that means one who was sort of over some others, was bad. He was fraudulent, and he was using fraud to get rich. Now, this word rich here, that the fact that Luke pauses to point that out, coming right after, if you just flip back a page in your Bible, probably it's just a page back in my Bible, to the rich young ruler in chapter 18, what had Jesus said about rich people? Well, what did he say? Hard to get into the kingdom. It is hard for a rich man to get into the kingdom. So, coming after that, when he says he was a chief tax collector, that is, he used fraud to get what he got, and he was rich, this man is probably not in the kingdom, and he's going to have a hard time getting there, which puts the rest of the story in an encouraging light for us all. Verses 3 and 4. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not, because of the crowd, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. What, if you were to give those two verses a title, what would you call them? What one word? Toss out some words. Curiosity. That was the first one I thought of. Any others? Persistence would be another pretty good one. Ingenuity. Found a sycamore tree. Energetic. Now, I think that I've heard sermons on this text to the effect that Zacchaeus was a real seeker and used ingenuity to seek the Lord. I don't think that's here because of the phrasing of this sentence. He sought to see who Jesus was. He didn't know much about Jesus. A celebrity's coming to town, passing through, so you get on the curb, right? You find a good spot on the curb. And if you can't, you crawl up in the building and get on a lamppost. So celebrity's coming. Big deal. There's no virtue that I can see here. I don't think Luke is trying to paint a picture of a man who is struggling with his wealth and trying to find truth, reality, God. He was rich, he was fraudulent, he was curious, and he had ingenuity and energy to get a peek at Jesus. So I don't know, you want to raise any points about verses 3 and 4? Verses 3 and 4 seem to me to just set up the stage with this curious fellow here wanting to see this celebrity passing through town. Verse 5 is much more important. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today. Now, this is interesting. First of all, where did he learn his name? How do you know his name? That's the question that comes to our mind. And we don't know the answer to that. I think two possibilities, revelation or strategy. I like to think about strategy. He's walking, just picture this now. Everybody else is looking at Jesus. Oh, here comes Jesus. Chatter, 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 chatter. Jesus is walking along thinking about lost people. Down here. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Any lost in Jericho? I wonder if there's any lost in Jericho. Anybody I might find today. And he's aware of this little guy scurrying around outside the crowd out here. Nobody else thinks it. And then all of a sudden, here's this guy running 100 yards ahead, climbing up in a tree. And Jesus sees him. And he says, Levi, that guy's dressed like a tax collector. What's his name? And Levi looks and says, oh, Zacchaeus. He was one of my bosses. Look at that guy. Puny Zacchaeus. I have no idea whether that happened or not. I love to think about it, though. So, because it's so easy to solve all Jesus' problems with revelation. You know, he knew it because he was God. Well, Jesus laid aside a lot of that glory and had a heart for people. And he strategized to reach them. And so, however he knew the name, here he comes up to this tree, and he stops, and he looks up at Zacchaeus, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to your house. Now, there's so much in this verse. We got to limit ourselves. What I focus on here, two things I think I want to zero in on. The first is simply that Jesus takes initiative to go after people who others considered unreachable and untouchable. Let me just take Luke as a few examples. Go back to chapter 15. And this will set us up so that we hear it the way Luke was writing it. Back in chapter 15, at the beginning of the chapter, real famous chapter because of the prodigal son, says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. Okay? Now, in response to that criticism, Jesus tells three stories. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. And it says that the shepherd leaves the 99, goes to find the one sheep. The woman sweeps and cleans until she finds the one coin. And the father runs out and kisses the son and puts a robe on his back and a ring on his finger, slays the the fatted calf. Now, the point of the parables is to explain verses 1 and 2. Namely, how do you handle the criticism that he eats with sinners and he receives sinners? And the answer is, Jesus is like a shepherd pursuing one sheep. He's like a woman pursuing one coin. He's like a father going out after a lost son. The reason he eats with tax collectors is because he's after them, the lost, to find them, to make joy happen in heaven over one tax collector who repents. Or turn back to chapter 7, verses 33 and 34. Here John the Baptist, he's been killed, and now Jesus wants to give a tribute to John, and he talks about him, and then he assesses the crowd like this, verse 33. John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say, he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, behold, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. So his reputation, Jesus put his reputation on the line. It was very sullied among the religious elite that he would hobnob and have parties with the tax collectors and sinners. And there are a lot of other texts we could look at. Probably one of the most obvious things he did that must have just shocked everybody was call who into his disciple band? Matthew or Levi. He calls one of these guys to be one of the 12, and one of them wrote part of the Bible. It's just amazing what Jesus pulled off with his disciples. There's another parable, I won't go back to it, but Matthew 21:28, where there are two sons, you remember? And Jesus says, which of these two sons really obeyed his father? One where the father says, do this, and the son said, yes, I'll do it. And then he doesn't do it. Or the other, and he says, do this, and the son says, no. But later on he does it. And they say, oh, the latter. And then Jesus says, tax collectors will go into the kingdom before you will, and so will harlots. He just talked to Pharisees in such a non-negotiable way. He said to them, tax collectors and harlots go into the kingdom before you, because they first said no. Their whole life was a big no to God. And then along comes Jesus, and all of a sudden they say, yes. And he accepts them. Okay, back over to verse 5. Here he is with another opportunity to do that sort of thing, and he doesn't miss it. Chief tax collector in Jericho, everybody's standing around, and he says, now, notice this. This really surprised me when I saw this. It doesn't say tax collectors, it doesn't say scribes and Pharisees. All. He knew he was going to alienate everybody. He's a celebrity. He's going to blow it. All of it. They all murmur. So Jesus kind of looks around and says, well, here goes. Zacchaeus, let's go eat. And everybody is upset with it, except Zacchaeus. And he's happy. But we'll get to that in a minute. One other thing in verse 5 here. Not only does Jesus take the initiative to go after the unacceptable, invite himself into his house, but he does it in a way that is unorthodox, out of the ordinary, surprising. Now, he might have kind of seen the guy up there and gone on by and then said to his disciples, dismiss the crowd, fellas. I need to be alone with God. And he sneaks back over to the tree and says, hey, come on down out of the tree. Let's talk. I see that you have a need. La, 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 la. He doesn't do that. He just right out of the blue says, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down. It is necessary for me to eat at your house today. That's surprising. That jolts you. It jolted Zacchaeus right out of his lostness. Now, here's the point I want to make. I have a feeling that we ought to form a new squadron at Bethlehem. I think maybe we'd call it code name Sycamore. Or maybe Sycamore Squad. And it's a high-risk squad of people who, whenever they hear of a unique need for a lost person, they come together and they strategize some weird way to meet them, to get them. Like, why don't we get together and figure out how we can get the owner of the Franklin Theater out to lunch? The owner of a porno theater down on Franklin. Anybody for that squad? Just call him up. Hi, my name's Scott Lastine. You own Franklin Theater, right? I'm concerned about that. I'll take you out to dinner downtown Minneapolis. Will you go with me? If you had prayed enough beforehand, he'd say yes. Isn't that what this text commands to us? Do out of the ordinary things. Call up your councilman. Say, I go to Bethlehem Baptist Church, heard you had a run-in with them. I'd like to get together with you and talk about it. Who knows? Who knows what might come? These people that are all out there, he's a chief tax collector. So all these bigwigs down there in City Hall and around, they're just ordinary people. In fact, they're sometimes less than ordinary. We just have the feeling that as soon as somebody's sort of elevated to a position of responsibility, I can't have anything to do with them. Pray for your leaders, maybe, but talk to them. Believe that they have a need at home. The kids are rotten. There's something wrong in the marriage. Believe that those people are real. They might want to hear about the good news. Well, if God lays it on anybody's heart, let's have code name Sycamore, where 2 or 3 people, they get a phone call. I have a friend at work. Here's the situation. You guys meet, strategize, and pray, and let's do something strange. Okay? And then the response in verse 6. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully.
This is Light and Truth, God-centered preaching to help you see Christ clearly and treasure Him truly. I'm your host, Dan Kruver. Thank you for listening. On our next episode, John Piper continues our 10-part series, The Seeking Savior, How Jesus Finds, Forgives, and Frees, with a message titled, The Treasure Greater Than Riches. I hope you'll join us. For more resources, visit desiringgod.org.